Hey guys. Settle here. Tonight we are gonna start. Medieval Europe discovered something that modern people would rather not think about. Not war. Not plague. Not torture. Not even death. But something far more constant. Human waste. Now. In modern life, waste is hidden. It disappears. You flush. You forget. You move on. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. And the entire system is designed to protect you from the reality that you are a creature that produces filth every day. But medieval Europe did not have that luxury. Medieval Europe discovered waste in the most direct way possible. It stayed. It smelled. It spread. It soaked into the world. And it became part of daily life in a way that would feel unreal to a modern person. Now. People imagine medieval life as castles. Or knights. Or kings. Or candlelight. But most medieval people didn't live in castles. They lived in small wooden houses. With dirt floors. With animals nearby. With smoke trapped inside. And with one major question that every human body asks every day. Where does it go? Now. Because medieval Europe discovered something early. The human body does not care about your social system. It does not care about your religion. It does not care about your class. It will produce waste no matter who you are. A peasant in a hut. A merchant in a town. A monk in a monastery. A noblewoman in a manor. A king in a castle. Every single one of them had the same problem. And medieval Europe discovered something. The problem was not just personal. It was communal. Because one person's waste was not only their business. It became everyone's air. Everyone's water. Everyone's street. Now. So medieval Europe discovered the chamber pot. A simple object. A bowl. A jar. A container. And it sounds harmless. Almost normal. But the chamber pot was not a bathroom tool. It was a lifestyle. Because in many medieval homes, the chamber pot was used in the same room where people slept. In the same room where they ate. In the same room where they prayed. And medieval Europe discovered something. Privacy is a luxury. Now. If you were a medieval peasant, you did not have a separate bathroom. You did not have a separate bedroom. You did not have a separate kitchen. You had a room. Sometimes one room. And everything happened there. Sleeping. Eating. Talking. Having children. Dying. And yes. Using the chamber pot. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something even more unsettling. The chamber pot was not always emptied immediately. Because sometimes it was cold. Sometimes it was dark. Sometimes it was dangerous outside. Sometimes you were sick. Sometimes you were simply exhausted. So the pot stayed. 4 hours. Sometimes overnight. Sometimes longer. And medieval Europe discovered something. Your home can smell like your body. All the time. Now. But the chamber pot is only the beginning. Because medieval Europe also discovered streets. And streets became the second stage of waste. Now. In many medieval towns, there was no sewer system. There were no underground pipes. There were no treatment plants. There was no sanitation department. There was only gravity. And hope. Now. So what happened? People emptied chamber pots into the street. They emptied them into gutters. They dumped waste behind houses. They dumped it near walls. They dumped it into pits. And sometimes, they dumped it from windows. Now. Yes. Medieval Europe discovered something that modern people would classify as a crime. You could be walking through a medieval town. Minding your business. Thinking about bread. Or rent. Or your sore feet. And suddenly, from above, someone's waist could fall. Now. Some towns tried to control this. They had rules. They had fines. They had warnings. In some places, you were supposed to shout before dumping. A warning cry. So that people below could move. But medieval Europe discovered something. Rules do not stop humans from being lazy. Now. And if you are imagining medieval streets as stone and clean and romantic, that is not the full truth. Because medieval streets were often mud. Mixed with straw. Mixed with animal droppings. Mixed with spilled food. Mixed with blood from butcher stalls. Mixed with rotting vegetables. Mixed with human waste. Now. So medieval Europe discovered something that sounds like a joke. But was not. If you fell in the street, you didn't just get dirty. You got contaminated. Now. And this is where medieval waste becomes more than disgusting. It becomes dangerous. Because medieval Europe did not understand germs. They did not understand bacteria. They did not understand invisible transmission. But they discovered the effects. They discovered that certain streets made people sick. They discovered that certain wells tasted wrong. They discovered that certain smells meant death. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something. Filth is not only unpleasant. It is lethal. Now. And this is where the medieval world becomes almost unbelievable. Because waste wasn't only in streets. It wasn't only in pots. It wasn't only behind houses. Waste was also in water. Now. In medieval towns, rivers were everything. Rivers gave water. Rivers gave transport. Rivers gave fish. Rivers gave power for mills. But medieval Europe discovered something. Rivers also became dumping grounds. Now. People washed clothes in rivers. They washed bodies. They cleaned animals. They rinsed meat. They threw dead things. They threw waste. And medieval Europe discovered something. When everyone uses the same water, everyone shares the same consequences. Now. And if you lived in a city, you might have gotten water from a well. But wells were not magical clean sources. Because wells were often near waste pits. And medieval Europe discovered something. Water moves underground. Now. And that means the waste from one household could seep into the water of another. Silently. Without warning. And medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. You can drink death without tasting it. Now. And this is where medieval life becomes even more disturbing. Because medieval people were not stupid. They noticed patterns. They noticed that water sometimes made people sick. So they developed a solution. A solution that sounds insane to modern ears. They drank beer. Now. Not strong beer. Not the kind that gets you drunk quickly. But weak beer. Small beer. Low alcohol. A daily drink. And medieval Europe discovered something. Fermentation is safer than guessing. Now. Beer was boiled during brewing. And boiling killed many pathogens. Even though medieval people didn't know why. They just knew something. The beer was less likely to kill you than the water. Now. So medieval Europe discovered something absurd. Children drank beer. Not as a party. As survival. Now. And then there were animals. Because medieval towns were not separated from animals. Animals were everywhere. Pigs. Chickens. Dogs. Horses. Cows. Goats. And medieval Europe discovered something. Animals do not respect streets. Now. So animals defecated everywhere. Horses in the road. Dogs in the alley. Pigs near the market. And medieval Europe discovered something. You can't build a clean city if it is also a farm. Now. And now. We arrive at one of the most medieval discoveries of all. The privy. Now. A privy sounds simple. A toilet. A small room. A place to go. But medieval privies were often nothing more than a wooden seat over a hole. Sometimes outside. Sometimes attached to a building. Sometimes hanging over a moat. Sometimes built into a wall. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something. A hole is not a system. Now. Because holes fill up. Now. When a privy pit filled. Someone had to deal with it. And that someone was not a noble. Not a priest. Not a knight. It was a worker. A laborer. A person whose job was to remove human waste. Now. And medieval Europe discovered a profession that sounds like a nightmare. The gong farmer. Now. The gong farmer worked at night. Because the smell was unbearable. And because the work was shameful. And because nobody wanted to see it. Now. They dug out waste from pits. They carried it away in barrels. They dumped it outside town. Or sold it. Yes. Sold it. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Waste is also fertilizer. Now. And this is where medieval life becomes even more unsettling. Because waste wasn't only thrown away. It was reused. Now. Human waste could be used for farming. Animal waste was used constantly. Dung was valuable. It was fuel. It was fertilizer. It was trade. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even filth has an economy. Now. And if you think this is where it ends. It doesn't. Because medieval Europe also discovered something darker. Waste is not only physical. Waste becomes moral. Now. In medieval thinking, filth was connected to sin. Smell was connected to corruption. Rot was connected to evil. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you want to control people, you can make their bodies feel shame. Now. So cleanliness became associated with purity. Not scientifically. Spiritually. And waste became a symbol. A symbol of the body's weakness. The body's animal nature. The body's constant betrayal. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something that still lives inside modern society. You can control humans by making them afraid of their own bodies. Now. But medieval people didn't just fear waste. They also lived with it. They adapted. They normalized it. And this is the part that feels most disturbing. Because medieval Europe discovered something deeply human. Humans can get used to almost any smell. If it is always there. Now. At first you would gag. You would panic. You would feel disgust. But medieval Europe discovered something. The brain adapts. Now. And soon, it becomes background. Like wind. Like smoke. Like noise. It becomes the normal scent of life. Now. And that discovery is not medieval. It's human. Now. And this is where medieval waste becomes more than history. Because modern humans still do this. We normalize what surrounds us. We accept what we breathe. We accept what we drink. We accept what we live inside. Because the mind prefers adaptation over despair. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something else. Waste creates social hierarchy. Now. Because the rich had ways to avoid it. The rich had private privies. The rich had servants. The rich had space. The rich had stone houses with better airflow. The rich could live upwind. The poor could not. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something timeless. The poor live closer to the smell. Now. And then. There was disease. Now. Because waste is not just disgusting. Waste is a highway. Now. A highway for parasites. For worms. For flies. For contamination. Now. And medieval Europe did not know why. But they saw what happened. They saw diarrhea kill children. They saw fevers spread. They saw skin infections. They saw entire neighborhoods become sick. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. You can die from something you cannot see. You can die from something you cannot see. Now. But they still had explanations. They blamed miasma. Bad air. Bad smells. They blamed curses. They blamed sin. They blamed God. Now. And sometimes they weren't entirely wrong. Because medieval Europe discovered something. When something smells like death. It often is. Now. And that is where medieval sanitation becomes a strange paradox. They didn't understand germs. But they understood that filth was dangerous. So they tried. They tried to clean. They tried to regulate. They tried to manage. Now. Some towns built gutters. Some towns built drains. Some towns hired street cleaners. Some towns banned dumping in certain places. Now. But medieval Europe discovered something. A city grows faster than its hygiene. Now. And the medieval world was growing. Towns expanding. Markets thriving. Trade increasing. People moving in. Now. And waste increased with them. Now. And eventually. Medieval Europe discovered something that would become one of the most important discoveries in human history. Sanitation is civilization. Now. Because without sanitation, cities become death traps. Now. And medieval Europe lived inside that truth for centuries. Now. So tonight. As you lie in bed. In a clean room. With clean air. With a bathroom that hides everything. Remember this. Medieval people did not live in filth because they were stupid. They lived in filth because systems take time. Because infrastructure is expensive. Because humans build beauty before they build pipes. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something. It is easier to build a cathedral than a sewer. Now. Let the room go quiet. Let the darkness settle. Because tonight's medieval discovery is not about knights. Not about castles. Not about kings. It is about the most basic truth of being human. Your body produces waste. And the world must decide what to do with it. Because once medieval Europe discovered waste, it didn't stop at streets. It didn't stop at chamber pots. It didn't stop at rivers. It went deeper. It climbed upward. Into castles. Into monasteries. Into the places that were supposed to be clean. Holy. Protected. And medieval Europe discovered something that feels like an insult. Even the richest people in the world still had to go. Now. And this is where we meet one of the most famous medieval inventions. The castle latrine. Now. If you have ever seen a medieval castle in a movie, you've seen it. A stone fortress. A high wall. A narrow window. And somewhere along that wall, a small little stone box sticking out. That box was not a guard tower. It was not a romantic balcony. It was a toilet. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something very practical. If you build your toilet high enough, gravity becomes your sanitation system. Now. So castles had latrines built into the wall. Sometimes a single seat. Sometimes multiple seats. Sometimes long rows for soldiers. And underneath, there was nothing. Just open air. Or a pit. Or water. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something horrifying. A castle wall could also be a waterfall. Now. If the latrine emptied into a pit, that pit filled up. And when it filled up, someone had to empty it. Even in a castle. Now. And this is where medieval Europe discovered another truth. Power does not erase filth. Power only hires someone else to touch it. Now. So yes. Even kings needed workers to clean their waste. Even queens. Even knights. Even lords. Now. And this created an entire hidden workforce. People who did the work that nobody wanted to talk about. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something. The most important jobs are often the most invisible. Now. But the castle latrine had another problem. A problem that was both disgusting and dangerous. Now. Because medieval Europe discovered something. A hole in a wall is also a weakness in a fortress. Now. Think about it. A castle is built to stop enemies. To stop arrows. To stop ladders. To stop siege towers. To stop soldiers. Now. And then you cut a hole in the wall. So people can use the toilet. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something. Your body can create security flaws. Now. There are real historical cases where attackers used latrines. They climbed through them. They broke through them. They entered through the waste chute. Now. Imagine that. A proud fortress. A symbol of power. Taken. Through the toilet. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something timeless. No system is strong where it is most embarrassing. Now. But it gets worse. Because sometimes castles built their toilets over water. Over moats. Over rivers. And in movies, moats look romantic. Still water. A reflection of the castle. Maybe swans. Maybe mist. But medieval Europe discovered the truth. Moats were not decorative. They were often soup. Soup made of mud. And algae. And dead animals. And trash. And sometimes human waste. Because if your castle latrine emptied into the moat, then the moat became a storage tank. And medieval Europe discovered something that should have been obvious. But apparently wasn't. If you poison the water around your own castle, you live inside your own poison. Because moats were not isolated from the environment. Animals drank from them. People washed near them. Rain overflowed them. Floods connected them to nearby water. And medieval Europe discovered something. Waste never stays where you put it. It spreads. It moves. It leaks. It travels. And the medieval world had another kind of toilet too. A toilet in a monastery. Monasteries were supposed to be clean. Ordered. Disciplined. A place of prayer. A place of silence. A place of holiness. But monks were still human. And medieval Europe discovered something. Holiness does not stop digestion. Sometimes incredibly advanced ones. Because monasteries were among the few places with consistent planning. Some monasteries built latrine blocks over running water. They redirected small streams. They created channels. They made primitive flushing systems. And medieval Europe discovered something surprising. Religion sometimes produced better engineering than war. Because monks didn't just build toilets. They built systems. They built drainage. They built water flow. They built regular cleaning schedules. But even then, there were limits. Because medieval Europe discovered something. A latrine system is only as clean as the people maintaining it. And maintenance is boring. And boring things get neglected. So even monasteries could become foul. Even holy places could stink. Even sacred halls could carry the smell of waste. And this brings us to something medieval people discovered about smell. Smell was not just unpleasant. Smell was a warning. Smell was a sign. Smell was a spiritual clue. Medieval people believed that bad smells were dangerous. That they carried sickness. That they carried corruption. They weren't completely wrong. They didn't understand germs. But they understood something. Rot means decay. Decay means risk. And medieval Europe discovered something. If something smells wrong, something probably is wrong. So they tried to fight smell. Not with cleaning. Not with sanitation. But with perfume. With herbs. With incense. With smoke. They carried flowers. They burned rosemary. They burned juniper. They burned frankincense. And medieval Europe discovered something. If something smells wrong, something probably is wrong. So they tried to fight smell. Not with cleaning. Not with sanitation. But with perfume. With herbs. With incense. With smoke. They carried flowers. They burned rosemary. They burned juniper. They burned frankincense. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you can't remove the filth, you cover it. This is why medieval people often smelled like herbs. Not because they were fancy, but because they were trying to survive their own streets. And this is where medieval waste becomes connected to medieval medicine. Because medieval doctors believed in the theory of humors. Blood. Phlegm. Black bile. Yellow bile. And disease was imbalance. So if you got sick, the solution was often purging, vomiting, diarrhea, bleeding, sweating. And medieval Europe discovered something. Medicine can make waste worse. If you were already weak, purging could kill you. If you were already dehydrated, diarrhea could finish the job. And medieval Europe discovered something brutal. Sometimes treatment is just controlled suffering. But medieval waste was not only human. Because medieval towns had another problem. Tanneries. If you have never heard of a tannery, good. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Leather is made through rot. To make leather, you needed to treat animal skins. To remove hair. To soften the hide. To preserve it. And medieval tanners used urine. Yes. Urine. Because urine contains ammonia. And ammonia helps break down hair and tissue. So medieval Europe discovered something horrifying. Urine was an industrial resource. People collected it. They stored it. They sold it. They used it. And tanneries were among the most disgusting places in any medieval town. They smelled like death. Like rot. Like chemicals. Like waste. So tanneries were often placed outside town walls. Downwind. Near rivers. Far from the rich. And medieval Europe discovered something. Pollution has a direction. It flows toward the powerless. And it wasn't only tanneries. Dyers. Butchers. Soap makers. All of them produced waste. And medieval Europe discovered something. Industry is filthy. The medieval economy was not clean. It was not romantic. It was not candlelit beauty. It was blood. It was animal guts. It was boiling fat. It was urine vats. It was rotting hides. And medieval Europe discovered something. Civilization smells like work. And here is where the story becomes strangely modern. Because medieval people didn't just live with waste. They argued about it. They regulated it. They fined people for it. They wrote laws. Some towns created breakers. Street cleaners. Men who scraped filth from roads. They created rules about where butchers could dump blood. They created rules about where tanners could operate. They created rules about throwing waste from windows. And medieval Europe discovered something. The moment a town becomes crowded, it becomes political. Because cleanliness becomes conflict. And then, there is the most medieval discovery of all. The discovery that turns waste into fear. They discovered that filth attracts rats. Rats were everywhere. In grain stores. In houses. In barns. In walls. And medieval Europe discovered something. Rats are not just pests. They are roommates. People trapped them. They poisoned them. They chased them. They kept cats. But rats kept coming. And then, the plague arrived. And medieval Europe discovered something that changed history forever. Waste is not just disgusting. Waste is a bridge for death. The plague was not caused by smell. But medieval people believed it was. They believed the air was poisoned. They believed the stench carried disease. And in a way, they were still trapped inside the same truth. Filth and death were connected. Even if they didn't know the real mechanism. And this created panic. People began cleaning more. Burning more herbs. Carrying more perfumes. Closing windows. Avoiding streets. Avoiding strangers. And medieval Europe discovered something. When people are afraid, they become obsessed with purity. But purity is not sanitation. Purity is not hygiene. Purity is moral. So medieval Europe discovered something dangerous. When you don't understand disease, you blame people. And this is where medieval waste becomes medieval cruelty. Because people started looking for scapegoats. Foreigners. Minorities. The poor. The sick. And medieval Europe discovered something that is not medieval at all. Fear creates monsters. And through all of this, through chamber pots, through castle toilets, through moat soup, through monastery latrines, through tanneries and urine vats, through laws and street cleaners, medieval Europe discovered one final truth. Waste never stops. It is constant. It is daily. It is human. And civilization is not built by ignoring it. Civilization is built by managing it. And that is why the medieval world feels so filthy. Because it was the world before systems. Before sewers. Before treatment plants. Before sanitation became invisible. And when you remove invisibility, you see the truth. Humans are animals. Animals produce waste. And every society, no matter how holy, no matter how powerful, no matter how beautiful, must decide what to do with it. Let the room go quiet again. Let the fan hum. Let the darkness settle. Because medieval Europe's most disgusting discovery was also one of its most important ones. A city cannot survive on stone and prayer alone. It also needs a way to carry away what the body leaves behind. Medieval Europe didn't just discover filth. It discovered something far more unsettling. It discovered crime. Not crime as a rare accident. Not crime as a shocking scandal. But crime as a normal feature of daily life. Like hunger. Like weather. Like taxes. And medieval Europe discovered something that modern people still struggle to accept. Most crime is not dramatic. Most crime is boring. It's not murder in dark alleys. It's not masked thieves leaping across rooftops. It's not secret assassins. It's not poison in wine. It's a missing chicken. A stolen loaf. A broken fence. A neighbor who borrowed your tools and never returned them. A merchant who cheated the scales. A tavern owner watering down the ale. And medieval Europe discovered something. The most dangerous criminal is the one who looks ordinary. Because medieval towns were tight. Crowded. Small. Everyone knew everyone. And when everyone knows everyone, crime becomes personal. If someone stole from you, it wasn't a faceless stranger. It was someone you had seen in church. Someone you had greeted in the market. Someone whose children played near your children. And medieval Europe discovered something uncomfortable. A community is not always safer. Sometimes it's just smaller. And because crime was common, punishment became common too. And medieval Europe discovered something that should terrify you. Punishment wasn't about justice. Punishment was about control. Because medieval society didn't have modern police. No detectives. No CCTV. No forensic science. No fingerprinting. So medieval Europe discovered something. If you can't stop crime, you must scare people out of it. And the medieval world became a theater. A stage. A public lesson. Punishment was not hidden. It was performed. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Fear is cheaper than law enforcement. So punishment became public. Loud. Humiliating. Sometimes slow. Sometimes cruel. And the first kind of punishment medieval Europe loved was shame. Because shame doesn't cost much. You don't need a prison. You don't need guards. You don't need food. You just need a crowd. And medieval Europe discovered something. A crowd is a weapon. So they built the pillory. The stocks. The cage. The shame post. If you stole. If you lied. If you cheated. If you fought. If you insulted someone powerful. You might be locked in a wooden frame. Hands trapped. Head trapped. Body exposed. And then the crowd came. They threw rotten vegetables. They threw mud. They threw dung. They spat. They laughed. They shouted. And medieval Europe discovered something dark. People enjoy punishment. Not everyone. But enough. Enough to make it a tradition. Because punishment wasn't only about correcting the criminal. It was about entertaining the town. And medieval Europe discovered something. Cruelty becomes normal when it becomes routine. But shame was only the beginning. Because medieval Europe also discovered something else. Pain is persuasive. So punishment escalated. Whipping. Branding. Mutilation. A thief might lose a hand. A counterfeiter might lose fingers. A liar might be branded. A repeat offender might be marked permanently. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you can't track criminals, you turn them into walking signs. And that's what mutilation was. A label. A warning. Not just, this person committed a crime. But, this person is a type of person. And medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. Once someone is marked, society stops seeing them as human. And that leads to prisons. Modern people imagine medieval prisons like stone dungeons. Dark. Chains. Rats. Skeletons in corners. And yes, those existed. But medieval Europe discovered something. Prisons weren't meant for punishment. They were meant for holding. Because prisons were expensive. You had to feed people. You had to guard them. You had to house them. And medieval governments didn't want to spend money on criminals. So medieval Europe discovered something. The cheapest punishment is the one that ends quickly. That's why punishments were public and immediate. That's why execution was common. That's why whipping was common. That's why exile was common. And exile is one of the most medieval punishments of all. Because exile didn't just remove you from town. It removed you from survival. A medieval town was safety. It was food. It was work. It was protection. Outside the town was wilderness. Bandits. Starvation. Cold. So medieval Europe discovered something. To be banished was almost the same as being sentenced to death. But medieval crime wasn't only theft. There was violence. And medieval Europe discovered something. Violence was normal. Fights were constant. Drunken brawls. Family feuds. Street arguments. Neighbor disputes. And because medieval people carried knives. Because knives were tools. Because everyone had something sharp. Those fights could become deadly fast. And medieval Europe discovered something. When weapons are everyday objects. Everyone is armed. So towns tried to control it. They made rules about carrying swords. About carrying knives at night. About fighting in taverns. And medieval Europe discovered something. Rules don't stop violence. They just punish it afterward. And then there was murder. Murder existed, yes. But medieval Europe discovered something. Most murder was not random. It was personal. A fight. A feud. A revenge. A drunken mistake. And medieval Europe discovered something. The most dangerous enemy is someone you already know. Let's talk about the medieval police. Because that's where things get truly stranger. There were no police as we know them. No officers patrolling. No emergency numbers. No central force. Instead, medieval Europe used community enforcement. The watch. The constable. The sheriff. And medieval Europe discovered something. The community is the law. If someone committed a crime, you raised the alarm. You shouted. You rang bells. You called neighbors. This was called the hue and cry. And medieval Europe discovered something. If everyone is responsible, no one is truly responsible. Because sometimes people helped. Sometimes they ignored it. Sometimes they joined in. Sometimes they protected the criminal because he was family. And medieval Europe discovered something. Justice is not equal in a small town. It's personal. Let's go even darker. Because medieval Europe discovered something else. The law belongs to the powerful. If you were poor, you were punished harder. If you were a peasant, you had fewer rights. If you were a servant, you had almost none. If you were a noble, you could often escape punishment. Or pay for it. Or negotiate it. And medieval Europe discovered something that modern people still hate admitting. Justice has a price. And one of the most medieval discoveries of all was that money can replace punishment. Instead of prison, instead of execution, you could pay a fine. And medieval Europe discovered something. A rich man's crime is a fee. A poor man's crime is a sentence. Even murder could sometimes be settled with money. A payment to the victim's family. A compensation. A Wergild tradition survived in places. And medieval Europe discovered something. Life has a price tag. If the law is willing to accept it. But sometimes punishment wasn't money. Sometimes punishment was spectacle. Execution. And medieval Europe discovered something. Death is the loudest law. Executions were public. Announced. Watched. Remembered. Hanging. Beheading. Burning. Drowning. Breaking on the wheel. And the method mattered. Because each method was symbolic. Burning was often linked to heresy. To witchcraft. To treason. Beheading was sometimes honorable. Reserved for nobles. Hanging was for thieves. For common criminals. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even death has class divisions. And sometimes execution wasn't fast. Because medieval Europe discovered something. The law wanted to hurt you. Before it ended you. Because pain was part of the message. And this leads to one of the most disturbing medieval discoveries. Torture. Torture was not used constantly everywhere. But it existed. And when it was used, it was terrifying. The rack. The strappado. The thumbscrew. Burning. Crushing. And medieval Europe discovered something that should never have been discovered. A human being can be forced to say anything. Confessions were treated like truth. But torture produces words. Not truth. And medieval Europe discovered something. If the system needs a confession, it will manufacture one. And this is where medieval punishment becomes psychological. Because the goal wasn't just to punish. It was to make people believe. Believe that the law was strong. Believe that order existed. Believe that the world was controlled. Even when it wasn't. And medieval Europe discovered something extremely modern. Punishment is performance. Now. There's one more medieval crime we need to talk about. The crime that was not theft. Not murder. Not assault. Not fraud. The crime that was considered worse than all of them. Heresy. And medieval Europe discovered something. You can criminalize thoughts. If you believed the wrong thing, you were dangerous. Because belief was power. And if the church controlled belief, then the church controlled society. So medieval Europe punished heresy harshly. Not because heresy stole money, but because heresy stole obedience. And medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. The state fears ideas more than knives. And this is where medieval crime and medieval religion become the same story. Because punishment wasn't just about law. It was about order. Hierarchy. Control. And medieval Europe discovered something deeply human. People don't obey because they agree. They obey because they're afraid. And that is why medieval punishment looks so brutal. Now. Because medieval society was fragile. A bad harvest could destroy a town. A disease could wipe out half a village. A war could burn everything. So the law didn't try to rehabilitate. It tried to intimidate. Because medieval Europe discovered something. If the world is unstable, you punish harder. And in the end, medieval crime and punishment reveals something uncomfortable. It reveals that medieval people weren't uniquely cruel. They were frightened. Frightened of hunger. Frightened of chaos. Frightened of strangers. Frightened of collapse. And when people are frightened, they don't build gentle systems. They build sharp ones. So as you lie there, in the quiet, with the fan humming, remember this. The medieval world was not held together by kindness. It was held together by fear. And fear is a strong glue. But it is never a peaceful one. Now let's move away from crime. Away from executions. Away from the pillory and the stocks. And let's step into something medieval people claimed was holy. Something they said was blessed. Something they said was natural. Love. Marriage. Family. And medieval Europe discovered something early. Marriage is not romance. Marriage is logistics. Modern people grow up thinking marriage is a personal choice. A story. A feeling. A soulmate. Medieval Europe discovered something far more practical. Marriage is an alliance. And in medieval life, alliances weren't emotional. They were survival. Because medieval society was not built on individual happiness. It was built on households. Lineages. Inheritance. Property. Labor. And medieval Europe discovered something that modern people would find unsettling. Between two people. Medieval marriage was a public institution. Everyone cared. Everyone watched. Everyone judged. Because marriage affected the whole community. Who owned land? Who inherited? Who worked where? Who owed what? Who gained power? And medieval Europe discovered something. Your relationship is everyone's business. When survival is shared. And this is where we get to one of the creepiest normal medieval rituals. The bedding ceremony. In some places, especially among nobles, the wedding didn't end with "good night." It ended with an audience. Friends. Relatives. Servants. Priests. They would escort the couple to the bed. Sometimes they would watch them get into it. Sometimes they would bless the bed. Sometimes they would tell jokes. Sometimes they would stay until the couple was clearly committed to the situation. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even sex can be supervised. If inheritance depends on it. Because consummation mattered legally. If a marriage was not consummated, it could be challenged. Annulled. Disputed. And medieval Europe discovered something. A marriage is not real until the body proves it. And yes, in some cases, proof was expected. The sheet. The blood. The confirmation. And medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. A woman's virginity was treated like legal evidence. Not romance. Not intimacy. Evidence. But the creepiest part is this. Medieval people weren't shocked by it. They weren't scandalized. They didn't see it as invasive. They saw it as responsible. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Trust is expensive. So society replaces it with ritual. Let's talk about love itself. Did medieval people love? Yes. Of course they did. But medieval Europe discovered something. Love is dangerous. Because love could disrupt alliances. Love could cause elopement. Love could create scandal. Love could produce children outside marriage. And those children threatened inheritance. So medieval society treated love like a fire. Useful. Warm. Beautiful. But capable of burning the entire house down. And medieval Europe discovered something. Romance is not harmless. This is why medieval Europe developed courtly love. The romantic poetry. The longing. The secret admiration. The knight suffering for a lady. Modern people think this was sweet. But medieval Europe discovered something. Courtly love was a safe fantasy. Because it was often deliberately unfulfilled. A married noblewoman. A knight. A poem. A song. A gaze. It was romance without inheritance risk. It was desire controlled by rules. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even love can be regulated. But not all love was poetic. Most medieval love was quiet. Practical. Two people working together. Two people surviving together. Love in medieval times was often built over time. Not chosen first. Because medieval Europe discovered something. If you share hardship with someone long enough, your heart adapts. Not always into love. Sometimes into dependence. Sometimes into tolerance. Sometimes into fear. And that leads us to the next creepy normal thing. Domestic violence. Medieval Europe discovered something. A household was a kingdom. And the husband was the ruler. And medieval law often supported this. A man was expected to control his wife. Control his children. Control his servants. And medieval Europe discovered something unsettling. Authority inside the home was treated like authority in the state. And if authority was challenged, punishment followed. Beatings were common. Not always extreme. But normalized. A husband disciplining his wife was often treated as normal. Not romantic. Not loving. But lawful. And medieval Europe discovered something dark. The home was not always safe. Let's talk about children. Now. Modern people imagine medieval parents as cold. Distant. Because children died so often. But medieval Europe discovered something. Parents loved their children deeply. They grieved. They prayed. They feared. But they also lived in reality. Children were labor. Children were help. Children were survival. So medieval Europe discovered something. Childhood was short. Children worked early. Fetching water. Gathering wood. Feeding animals. Helping in the fields. And medieval Europe discovered something. A child was not protected from life. A child was trained for it. And here is one of the creepiest normal parts. Children saw everything. Death. Sex. Violence. Disease. Punishment. Executions. Everything. There was no age appropriate. There was only life appropriate. And medieval Europe discovered something. In a harsh world, innocence is a luxury. Let's talk about childbirth again. Because childbirth wasn't just a medical event. It was a social one. Women gathered. Midwives. Neighbors. Relatives. Men were often kept out. But the room was full. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Birth is dangerous. And if something went wrong, you needed witnesses. Witnesses to confirm the child was born alive. Witnesses to confirm the child belonged to the husband. Witnesses to confirm the mother died in a respectable way. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even birth needed legal protection. And if the mother died, and that happened often, the household shifted instantly. A man remarried quickly. Not because he didn't love her. But because medieval Europe discovered something. A home without a woman collapses fast. Someone needed to manage food. Clothes. Children. Labor. So remarriage could happen within months. And medieval Europe discovered something. Grief had to share space with survival. Let's talk about something that sounds gentle. Family meals. In medieval times, food was not a bonding moment. It was a calculation. How much bread is left? How much ale? How much cheese? How much meat? How long until winter? And medieval Europe discovered something. A meal is not comfort when hunger is always nearby. Even celebrations were practical. Weddings were feasts. Not just for joy, but to prove wealth. To prove alliances. To show the community. This household is stable. And medieval Europe discovered something. Public celebration is a political act. Let's go even darker. Because medieval Europe also discovered something. Family can be a trap. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born a serf, you were tied to land. If you were born into debt, you inherited it. And medieval Europe discovered something. Your family could determine your entire life. Before you spoke your first word. And yet, in the middle of all this, love still existed. Quiet love. A wife saving the best piece of bread for her husband. A husband carrying water for his wife when she's exhausted. Parents rocking a sick child through the night. Two people laughing together while the world stays cruel. And medieval Europe discovered something. Humans will create tenderness. Even inside systems that don't care. And that's the strangest part. Because medieval family life wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a romance novel. It was survival. But survival still had moments of warmth. And that warmth made the cold feel even colder. So as you lie there, in the quiet, with the fan humming, remember this. Medieval love wasn't less real. It was just less free. And the creepiest normal thing about medieval family life is that everyone accepted it. They didn't call it oppression. They called it life. Now, let's step away from weddings. Away from beds. Away from family contracts disguised as love. And let's walk into the medieval kitchen. Because medieval Europe discovered something early. Food is not comfort. Food is anxiety. Modern people treat food like pleasure. A hobby. A craving. A choice. Medieval people treated food like a countdown clock. Because the medieval world was built on one terrifying truth. Hunger was always nearby. Not dramatic hunger. Not the kind that appears in movies. The quiet kind. The slow kind. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that sits in your stomach like a stone. And medieval Europe discovered something. You can live with hunger. For a long time. Not well. Not happily. But you can. And that's why medieval food culture feels so strange. Because medieval people didn't eat to enjoy. They ate to survive. And survival eating creates a very specific mindset. It makes people suspicious. It makes people careful. It makes people obsessive. Because medieval Europe discovered something. The difference between life and death can be one bad harvest. Let's start with bread. Bread wasn't a side dish. Bread was the center of life. Bread was the plate. Bread was the spoon. Bread was the foundation. And medieval Europe discovered something. If bread fails, everything fails. Because bread meant grain. And grain meant weather. Rain at the wrong time. Frost too early. Drought too long. A swarm of insects. A disease in the fields. And suddenly the village wasn't just low on food. The village was dying. Now. And medieval Europe discovered something. Nature is not neutral. Nature is a judge. Most peasants ate a diet built around grain. Barley. Rye. Oats. Sometimes wheat if you were lucky. And medieval Europe discovered something. Wheat is luxury. White bread was a status symbol. Dark bread meant poverty. And medieval Europe discovered something deeply humiliating. Even bread has class. But medieval bread was not always bread. It could be mixed with anything. Ground peas, beans, chestnuts, bran. Sometimes, when things got desperate, sawdust. Not because people were stupid. Because medieval Europe discovered something. When you're starving, you become creative. And here's where medieval food becomes truly unsettling. Food wasn't always safe. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Storage is harder than farming. You could grow grain. But keeping it dry. Keeping it from rats. Keeping it from mold. That was a battle. Rats and mice weren't pests. They were competitors. And medieval Europe discovered something. You are not the only species that wants your food. And mold. Mold was everywhere. Bread could grow fuzz. Cheese could grow strange colors. Grain could rot. And medieval Europe discovered something. You don't throw food away. You scrape it. You cut around it. You boil it. You hide it in stew. And medieval Europe discovered something. Stomach pain is better than starvation. And sometimes the grain had something worse than mold. Ergot. A fungus that infects rye. It can cause hallucinations. Convulsions. Burning sensations. Gangrene. And medieval Europe didn't know what it was. They didn't know about fungus. So medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. Food can make you insane. And when people started twitching, seeing visions, screaming, losing fingers, they didn't blame bread. They blamed God. Or demons. Or witches. And medieval Europe discovered something. When you don't understand biology, you create monsters. Let's talk about meat. Modern people think medieval people ate meat constantly. Big feasts. Roasted pigs. Hunting. That's the noble fantasy. The reality for most peasants was very little meat. Meat was expensive. Animals were valuable alive. A chicken was eggs. A cow was milk. A sheep was wool. Killing an animal for meat meant losing a long-term resource. And medieval Europe discovered something. You don't eat your wealth. Unless you have to. So meat was rare. When peasants ate meat, it was often salted fish. Herring. Cod. Eels. Or small scraps. And medieval Europe discovered something. Fish is medieval fast food. Because religion demanded it. The church required fasting days. No meat on Fridays. No meat in Lent. No meat on many holy days. And medieval Europe discovered something. Religion controls your stomach. And this is where medieval food becomes even stranger. Because medieval people followed food rules that modern people would find exhausting. You could not eat certain things on certain days. You could not eat meat. But fish was allowed. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you want to control people, control what they eat. Because food is daily. Food is unavoidable. So religious control wasn't just spiritual. It was physical. Let's talk about vegetables. Yes, medieval people ate vegetables. Cabbage. Onions. Leeks. Beans. Peas. Turnips. But the vegetable problem was this. Vegetables don't store well. So medieval Europe discovered something. Winter is a food apocalypse. If you didn't salt it, dry it, pickle it, smoke it, it would not survive. So medieval kitchens were full of preservation. Smoke. Salt. Vinegar. Brine. And medieval Europe discovered something. Preservation is the taste of fear. Let's talk about stew. Because stew was medieval life in a pot. A big cauldron. Whatever you have goes in. Cabbage. Beans. Bread. A bone. A scrap of meat. And medieval Europe discovered something. Soup hides poverty. Because stew looks like food. Even when it's mostly water. And medieval Europe discovered something. If the pot is warm, people feel safer. But medieval kitchens were not clean. Not because medieval people were stupid. But because medieval Europe discovered something. Cleanliness is hard without water and soap. And soap existed. But it was not always cheap. And water had to be carried. And firewood had to be collected. So medieval kitchens were full of bacteria. Raw meat. Dirty hands. Animals nearby. Flies everywhere. And medieval Europe discovered something. Food poisoning feels like punishment from God. Because you didn't know about germs. You just knew. You ate. And then you suffered. And here is the creepiest normal medieval food fact. People didn't always eat 3 meals. Many peasants ate 1 or 2. Breakfast wasn't universal. And medieval Europe discovered something. Being hungry in the morning is normal. Even the wealthy. Even nobles. Lived with food anxiety. Not because they had no food. But because medieval Europe discovered something. Wealth does not remove fear. It just changes the shape of it. Nobles feared famine too. Because famine could cause rebellion. Famine could cause riots. Famine could collapse order. And medieval Europe discovered something. A starving crowd is more dangerous than an invading army. So rulers stored grain. They taxed it. They controlled it. And medieval Europe discovered something. Food is power. And then there was the marketplace. Markets were noisy. Crowded. Smelly. Full of shouting. And medieval Europe discovered something. Markets are where trust goes to die. Because everyone cheated. Weights were manipulated. Bread was made smaller. Meat was sold old. Ale was watered down. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you can't measure honestly, you steal legally. So towns created laws. Bread laws. Ale laws. Market inspections. And medieval Europe discovered something. Food crime is treated like real crime. Because it was. If you sold bad food, you weren't just dishonest. You were dangerous. And medieval Europe discovered something. Poison doesn't need to be intentional. Let's talk about the final medieval food horror. Famine. Famine was not rare. Famine was cyclical. A bad year. Then another. Then war. Then disease. And medieval Europe discovered something. Famine changes people. It changes morality. It changes kindness. It changes law. Because when food disappears, society disappears. People steal. People fight. People abandon children. People sell themselves. People eat things they never thought they'd eat. And medieval Europe discovered something. Hunger is stronger than religion. Stronger than law. Stronger than love. And yet, even in famine, people tried to keep rituals. They still baked bread if they could. They still shared soup. They still said prayers. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Humans need meaning. Even when starving. So as you lie there. In the quiet. with the fan humming. Remember this. Medieval food wasn't cuisine. It was survival math. Every bite was calculation. Every meal was a victory. And the creepiest normal thing about medieval eating was that people lived like this every day. Not as a special hardship. As normal life. If medieval food was anxiety you could chew, then medieval waste was anxiety you could smell. Because medieval Europe discovered something early. A human body produces a lot of problems. Every day. Relentlessly. And unlike bread. Unlike stew. Unlike ale. Waste does not feel holy. It doesn't feel meaningful. It just appears. And medieval Europe had to deal with it the way it dealt with everything else. Not with modern systems. Not with infrastructure. Not with careful planning. But with improvisation. Habit. And quiet acceptance. So let's talk about the medieval street. Because the medieval street was not a clean pathway. It was not a neutral space. It was not outside. The medieval street was part of your home. It was where animals walked. Where carts rolled. Where children played. Where merchants sold food. Where fights happened. Where people prayed. And where waste went. Because medieval Europe discovered something. When you don't have plumbing, everything becomes plumbing. Most medieval houses did not have toilets. They had chamber pots. A simple container. A bowl. A bucket. Sometimes something fancier, if you were wealthy. And medieval Europe discovered something. No matter how expensive your chamber pot is, it still holds the same thing. So people used the chamber pot. In the dark. In the cold. In crowded rooms. Sometimes with family members sleeping inches away. And then. In the morning. The pot had to be emptied. And here's the part modern people always imagine. Yes. Sometimes people dumped waste into the street. From windows. From doors. From back alleys. Not always. Not everyone. But often enough that medieval towns developed a very specific cultural tradition. Listening. Because if you were walking under a window, you learned to listen for movement. You learned to glance upward. You learned to walk quickly. And medieval Europe discovered something. The sky is not always safe. Some towns had rules. You were supposed to dump waste in certain places. In pits. In designated areas. Near rivers. Outside walls. And medieval Europe discovered something. Rules are easy to write. Following them is optional. Because when it's cold. And the street is dark. And you're tired. And the pit is far away. The window becomes very convenient. And medieval streets were already dirty. Mud. Horse manure. Animal droppings. Rotting vegetables. Spilled ale. Blood from butchering. And medieval Europe discovered something. A street is not a place. It's a substance. People wore shoes. Thick shoes. But shoes didn't protect you from everything. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Mud can climb. It climbs up your legs. It soaks into cloth. It stains everything. And medieval people did not have endless spare clothing. A peasant might own only a few garments. And medieval Europe discovered something. If your clothes get ruined, your life gets harder. So medieval people learned to live with filth. Not because they enjoyed it. But because it was the environment. And when filth becomes environment, your brain stops reacting to it. And that is always when things become dangerous. Let's talk about medieval toilets. Some houses did have them. Especially in castles and monasteries. These were latrines. Often built into walls. A small stone seat. A hole. And then gravity did the rest. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you build a toilet into a castle wall, the outside of the castle becomes part of the toilet. So waste fell into pits. Or directly into moats. Or into the ground. And medieval Europe discovered something. A moat is not always water. Sometimes it's history. Castle latrines were practical. But also terrifying. Because they were cold. Dark. And sometimes they collapsed. And medieval Europe discovered something. Falling into a latrine is a real way to die. Not a metaphor. Not a joke. A real medieval death. People could fall into cesspits. Get stuck. Suffocate. Drown. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even your toilet can kill you. And then there were cesspits. Cesspits were storage. Large pits where waste collected. Sometimes under houses. Sometimes behind them. Sometimes shockingly close to wells. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you put your waste near your water, you create a mystery illness. But medieval people didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about contamination. They just knew. Sometimes the town got sick. Sometimes everyone had diarrhea. Sometimes children died suddenly. Sometimes a fever moved through the neighborhood like smoke. And medieval Europe discovered something. Illness feels random. When you don't understand cause. Cesspits had to be emptied. Because eventually they filled. And that leads us to one of the most disturbing medieval professions. The gong farmer. Yes. That was real. A gong farmer was a person whose job was to remove human waste from cesspits. At night. Usually at night. Because medieval Europe discovered something. This is not a job you want people watching. Gong farmers climbed into pits. With buckets. Shovels. Ropes. They scooped waste. They hauled it out. They loaded it onto carts. They transported it away. And medieval Europe discovered something. Someone always has to do the worst work. And gong farmers were paid well. Because nobody else wanted it. They were also treated like outcasts. Because medieval Europe discovered something. People will pay you. And still despise you for helping the work. And the work was dangerous. Not just disgusting. Dangerous. Because cesspits produced gases. Toxic fumes. And medieval Europe discovered something. Waste can create invisible death. A gong farmer could climb down. And simply stop moving. Suffocate. Collapse. And then someone else had to climb down to retrieve him. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even the people cleaning your filth can die from it. But waste wasn't only human. Animals lived close to people. Pigs. Chickens. Goats. Sometimes cows. Even in towns. And medieval Europe discovered something. Animals are not pets. They are roommates. Animals produced waste too. And that waste mixed with human waste. And that mixture mixed with mud. And that mud mixed with water. And that water splashed into homes. And medieval Europe discovered something. You cannot separate life from filth. When you live that close to survival. And here's the part that makes medieval life feel truly alien. Smell. Modern people treat smell like a problem. We remove it. We hide it. We disinfect. Medieval people treated smell like information. Because medieval medicine believed in miasma. Bad air. Bad smells were thought to cause disease. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you don't understand germs, you become afraid of odor. This is why medieval people burned herbs. Incense. Juniper. Rosemary. They fumigated houses. They carried scented pouches. They believed perfume could protect them. And medieval Europe discovered something. When you can't fight disease, you fight the atmosphere. But sometimes, they were half right. Not because smell caused illness, but because smell was often a warning sign. Rotting meat. Stagnant water. Human waste. Dead animals. Smell often meant bacteria. They just didn't know the word. And medieval Europe discovered something. You can sense danger without understanding it. Let's talk about the river. Because medieval rivers were not scenic. They were functional. A medieval river was used for everything. Drinking. Washing clothes. Bathing. Cleaning tools. Dumping waste. Butchering animals. Disposing of dead things. And medieval Europe discovered something. A river can be a blessing. And a sewer. At the same time. Cities built near rivers because water mattered. But those same cities slowly poisoned their own water. And medieval Europe discovered something. Human beings will destroy their lifeline. If it makes daily life easier. Even wells were risky. Wells could be contaminated. Especially in crowded towns. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you dig a hole deep enough, you can still find sickness. So what did medieval people drink? Water, yes. But also ale. Small beer. Weak beer. Even children drank it. Not because they were partying. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Fermentation is safer than trust. Boiling water helped. Brewing helped. But again, they didn't know why. They just knew. Beer didn't kill you as often. And in medieval logic, that meant it was healthy. So medieval life developed a quiet reality. A town smelled. Not as an exception. As a baseline. And people adapted. They didn't gag constantly. They didn't faint. They didn't complain every day. They just lived. And medieval Europe discovered something. The human brain can normalize almost anything. Even sewage. Even rot. Even sickness. And the creepiest part is that this wasn't a medieval failure. It was medieval practicality. Because medieval people weren't trying to be disgusting. They were trying to survive. They were trying to eat. Work. Pray. Raise children. Avoid war. Avoid disease. And in that world, waste was not a shocking problem. It was just another daily task. Like chopping wood. Like carrying water. Like feeding animals. Like burying the dead. So as you lie there, in the quiet, with the fan humming, remember this. Medieval Europe did not live in filth because they didn't care. They lived in filth because there was no clean option. And when there is no clean option, you stop imagining cleanliness. If medieval streets were the outside, then medieval bodies were the battlefield. Because medieval Europe discovered something so normal, so constant, so humiliating, that people stopped talking about it the way we talk about it now. They discovered parasites. Not as a rare problem. Not as an embarrassing accident. But as a permanent roommate. Lice. Fleas. Bedbugs. Worms. Ticks. Mites. And the worst part was not that they existed. The worst part was that they were expected. A medieval child did not catch lice. A medieval child grew up with lice the way a modern child grows up with school. It was part of the system. Part of life. Part of being human in a world where washing was limited. And cloth was precious. And animals lived close. And beds were shared. And winter forced everyone into the same warm space. And medieval Europe discovered something. Warmth is comfort. But warmth is also an invitation. Let's start with lice. Head lice. Body lice. The tiny insects that live where hair is thick. Where skin is warm. Where scratching is easy. Medieval people scratched constantly. Not dramatically. Not as a crisis. Just as a habit. A small, unconscious movement. Like adjusting your sleeve. Like rubbing your eyes. Like shifting in bed. And medieval Europe discovered something. If itching becomes normal, you stop noticing it. Lice spread through contact. Shared beds. Shared hats. Shared cloaks. Shared combs. And medieval Europe discovered something. Privacy is a luxury. In many medieval homes, an entire family slept in one room. Sometimes in one bed. Parents. Children. Grandparents. And medieval Europe discovered something. A bed is not a private space. It is a communal survival zone. And when you sleep that close, everything spreads. Illness. Flea. Lice. Even emotions. But lice weren't just uncomfortable. They were dangerous. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Without understanding it. Lice carry disease. Typhus. Trench fever. They didn't know the words. But they knew the result. A fever that burned through towns. A sickness that followed armies. A sudden wave of death that felt like a curse. And medieval Europe discovered something terrifying. Sometimes the thing that kills you is too small to see. And that brings us to fleas. Fleas were everywhere. In beds. In straw mattresses. In animal fur. In rugs. In clothing. In cracks in wooden floors. And medieval Europe discovered something. You can clean the surface. And still sleep inside an infestation. Because fleas love fabric. They love warmth. They love dark corners. They love straw. And medieval beds were full of straw. Straw was cheap. Straw was replaceable. Straw was warm. Straw was a flea paradise. And medieval Europe discovered something. A mattress is not soft. It is alive. Medieval people did try to fight fleas. They shook out bedding. They beat blankets. They aired out cloth. They used herbs. Wormwood. Lavender. Mint. They believed strong smells drove insects away. And sometimes they actually did. Because medieval Europe discovered something. Nature can be medicine. Even when you don't know why. But fleas had a secret. A secret so catastrophic it would rewrite history. The flea was the messenger of the plague. The Black Death. Not every plague outbreak worked the same way. But fleas on rats. Fleas on animals. Fleas on humans. Played a huge role. And medieval Europe discovered something. That no one wanted to discover. You can die. Because a flea jumped. Let's talk about bedbugs. Because bedbugs are the medieval horror story that never ended. They hide. They wait. They come out at night. They bite you while you sleep. And they leave you with itching and swelling. And a sense of violation. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even sleep is not safe. Bedbugs lived in wooden beds. In wall cracks. In straw. In cloth seams. And medieval people didn't have modern insecticide. So they used heat, smoke, boiling water. They tried scraping cracks. They tried sealing wood. They tried burning bedding. And medieval Europe discovered something. Sometimes the only way to clean is to destroy. But most people couldn't afford to destroy. Cloth was expensive. Blankets were precious. A winter cloak could be the most valuable thing you owned. So medieval Europe discovered something. Sometimes you live with the problem, because solving it would ruin you. And then there were worms. Intestinal worms. Tapeworms. Roundworms. Panworms. Parasites that lived inside you. Quietly. Feeding. Growing. Stealing nutrition from a body already surviving on thin food. And medieval Europe discovered something. Sometimes you feel hungry. Because something else is eating for you. Children were hit hardest. Because children were smaller. Weaker. More vulnerable. And medieval Europe discovered something. A child can starve. Even while eating. How did worms spread? Dirty water. Undercooked meat. Contaminated hands. Poor sanitation. And medieval Europe discovered something. Cleanliness is not morality. It is infrastructure. But medieval medicine did not understand parasites. They understood symptoms. Itching. Fever. Weight loss. Weakness. Restlessness. Night crying. And medieval Europe discovered something. If you don't know the cause, you invent explanations. So people blamed humors. Bad air. Sin. Curses. The evil eye. And medieval Europe discovered something. When you can't see the enemy, you make the enemy supernatural. But here's the strange part. Medieval people also had practical routines. Grooming. Delousing. Picking. Yes. Picking. It was normal. People sat together and picked lice out of hair. Out of seams. Out of cloth. And medieval Europe discovered something. Disgust is cultural. Because to them, this wasn't shameful. It was care. It was affection. It was maintenance. The way we might trim nails. Or brush hair. Or clean a wound. There are even records of lice being used as insults. As jokes. As symbols of poverty. But also as symbols of humanity. Because lice did not care if you were noble. Or peasant. They didn't care if you prayed. They didn't care if you were clean. They didn't care if you were rich. They just wanted warmth. And medieval Europe discovered something. Parasites are the great equalizer. But nobles did have advantages. More linen. More spare clothing. More servants to wash cloth. More access to baths. More perfumes. More privacy. And medieval Europe discovered something. Wealth doesn't remove suffering. It just makes it quieter. And if you want something truly unsettling, think about medieval monasteries. Monks lived close together. Shared sleeping spaces. Shared clothing sometimes. And they were supposed to be holy. Pure. Disciplined. And medieval Europe discovered something. Holiness does not repel fleas. So what did medieval people do to fight parasites? They washed when they could. They boiled cloth when possible. They used lye soap sometimes. They hung clothes in sunlight. They beat bedding. They shaved hair. They used combs. They used herbal repellents. They burned old straw. And medieval Europe discovered something. Even without science, humans will invent survival routines. But none of it worked perfectly. Because the environment was still the same. Crowded rooms. Animals close by. Straw beds. Limited water. Cold winters. Shared clothing. And medieval Europe discovered something. You can't win a war if the battlefield is your own skin. And this is where medieval life becomes psychologically fascinating. Because parasites do something to the mind. Constant itching. Constant discomfort. Constant tiny pain. It wears you down. It makes you irritable. It makes you tired. It makes you less patient. And medieval Europe discovered something. Sometimes people are cruel. Because they are exhausted. Not because they are evil. Because their body is constantly under attack. So when we imagine medieval people as harsh, as angry, as violent, we forget they were also itchy.